Good morning, everyone. We're going to wait just a moment to allow people to access the webinar, the virtual media event, and then we will get started with introductions. So bear with us for one moment, please. Good. It looks like we've had a number of people dial in from around the United States for this event. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Brian Keel. I'm Executive Director of Farmers for Free Trade, and we're bringing you a media event today live from Breckenridge, Michigan, featuring Secretary of Agriculture Tim Boring, as well as a number of speakers from the Michigan agricultural industry, and we'll introduce each of them in turn. I will note that this event is being live streamed on Facebook Live and recorded, so people can view it after the fact as well. We'll be posting it to our different social media platforms at Farmers for Trade. I will also note that if you have questions during the media event, please put them into the chat or the Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen. I'll be viewing those questions, and at the end of the presentation, we'll ask those questions in the order in which they're received. So please do drop in questions. When you drop in a question, also please identify yourself, which media outlet you are with. So again, thank you so much for joining this event. I'm going to turn to our site host, Robert Geers. He's Vice President of Michigan Agricultural Commodities, a soybean processing facility in Breckenridge, Michigan, where we're hosting this event. We had hoped to be outside with a view of the facility itself, but unfortunately rain has driven us inside today. I'm sure farmers who are harvesting are also cursing Mother Nature at this moment. But with that, Robert, why don't I turn to you for an introduction of our location and why we chose this site?
Okay, thanks, Brian. Again, my name is Robert Geers, Vice President of Michigan Agricultural Commodities. And our company is based out of Lansing, Michigan. We have our corporate office there. We also own a company called London Agricultural Commodities that is based in London, Ontario. We also have many grain assets in Ontario as well. So between our two companies, we cover the majority of Southwest Ontario as well as Michigan. I want to welcome everyone today to Breckenridge, Michigan. Breckenridge is our company's largest location. It is also the largest and most agriculturally diverse grain elevator in the state of Michigan. We have over 15 million bushels of grain storage space here. We handle a variety of commodities, many of which get exported. Our primary commodities are corn, soybeans, wheat, black beans, and IP soybeans. We also have an agronomy retail location out of this location. So it is a very busy hub of production agriculture here in the heart of central Michigan. What is very unique about this location is the fact that we rely very much on the exports for the commodities that we handle, primarily black beans. The majority of our black beans end up being exported out of the country, as well as half of the soybeans that we handle at this location are exported via either the Gulf or the East Coast export markets. So the value of exports for our company and our farmer customers is very, very important. And all that we do is really underpinned and supported by the exports and the value of our export customers that we have across the country and the world. So our company has been here for almost 50 years. We are going on almost 50 million bushels of space. We have grown due to the value of exports. Our customers have grown due to the value of exports and the ability to have free trade. So we look forward to being able to continue our relationships with our export partners over the coming years, and are thankful for Farmers for Free Trade to spend some time touring the country and kind of getting a boots on the ground feel for how valuable it is for trade for the customers and farmers that we deal with. Because as a company, we deal with over 5,200 customers, and each one is impacted by the value of trade. So with that, if there's any questions at the end, I'd be willing to take them, but we'll hand this mic over to MDARD Director Tim Boring.
Thanks, Robert. Like Robert said, my name is Tim Boring. I'm the Director of the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. Really glad to be here in Breckenridge this morning. Really in some of the heart of agricultural production region here in Michigan. Robert did a great job talking about the diversity of production that we have here in this part of the state. And I think that's really representative of just how nuanced and complex a lot of these trade challenges really are for producers here in Michigan. Obviously, the soybean issues here have been front and center as we talk about some of these trade challenges, those significant concerns with China not in the soybean market here for sourcing United States production anymore, and all the cascading ramifications that's having. A place like Breckenridge is going to really exemplify the fact that it's not just about soybeans, though, and how dramatic and how far-reaching some of these consequences are. It's raining here today in Breckenridge. Some of the first rain we've had in quite a while. It's been a significantly dry fall for us in Michigan, and I know friends in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois are under similar droughts here. It's putting a lot of pressure on farmers. The yields are down. Farmers are not going to be yielding their way to prosperity this year, even with in the face of some of these diminished economic returns and the market potential. Farmers right now are making decisions about what they're going to be planting next year. We've had some pretty favorable planting conditions for wheat, which always helps putting that crop in the ground. But with the depressed market highlighted by soybeans, it's weighing down on the remainder of our markets. The economic prospects for other crops like corn and soybeans, or wheat and corn, are going to be really diminished. We talk about the uncertainty of markets such as our dry edible beans here in Michigan, that Michigan's the leading grower of black beans in the country, and we've got a lot of market uncertainty about where those crops are going to go into the future. That South American, that Mexican market's increasingly sourcing from Brazil and Argentina, not dissimilar from what we've seen with the soybean market here across the world. There's continued concern about how the United States can be viewed as a reliable and trustworthy economic trading partner. So we're going to continue really to work on talking about the ramifications of some of these ongoing trade disputes are going to have for producers across Michigan. It's for us here in the state, it's more than just soybeans. It's the dry bean market. It's a lot of our fruit and vegetables. We've seen decreased exports in a number of our specialty crops. So for a state that grows a lot of different things and powers our rural economies in a lot of different ways, that's a real concern for growers. It's a concern for so many processors that we have of fruit and vegetables and grains here in the state. It's going to be a significant drain on our economy in a lot of different ways. So we're going to talk about the need for some of that direct financial assistance in the short term. And while that doesn't meet some needs for growers here, again, in the immediate term of how we're going to be managing a path forward, it's going to have to be longer discussions here of what this means for us moving forward in 1 year, 3 years, 10 years of how are we going to be building trade markets in reliable and predictable ways to the extent to which the United States can continue to be viewed as a reliable trading partner. If we're going to see some of these acreage shifts because we just are simply overproducing too many of these commodities that don't have markets across the world anymore, that's going to result in some serious ramifications for Michigan producers and really across the Midwest of what these cropping systems look like that we've spent decades building. And we might be at the precipice here of some rapid changes for what that means for growers. And so much like we talk about in the broader context of trade and business making decisions, that predictability, that certainty is of paramount importance to producers. We know there's a lot of moving pieces in front of us today. And so growers are going to be at the forefront of having to make some really tough decisions and moving forward without a lot of certainty around how they build their businesses into the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck Lippstreu, who can share a little bit more context around what this means for the agribusiness industry here in Michigan.
Thanks, Director. Thanks, Robert, for hosting here in Breckenridge. And I just want to start by saying thank you to all those that are taking time to dial in and hear our story here in mid-Michigan. I'm Chuck Lippstreu. I lead the Michigan Agribusiness Association. We represent the full scope of agricultural businesses once you leave the farm gate, all the different businesses of all sizes that are working with Michigan farmers to make sure they're successful before, during, and after the growing season, including handling and marketing their crops and making sure that we maintain customers both in the United States and around the world for all the different things that we grow here in Michigan, from the substantial grain and oilseed production in our state to, as the director mentioned, the specialty production in Michigan. I want to be clear, our state is an export success story. Michigan is proud to grow crops that are enjoyed by people on 6 continents or make their way into the value chain in some way on 6 continents. And just this past year and multiple times over recent years, our state has reached record export value, thanks in large part to the efforts of our member businesses and the farmers they partner with, as well as a great relationship on the ground with our state system to facilitate exports. And that's a credit to the director and MDARD staff for making sure that we're integrated as an industry, to be sure that logistics function in the state of Michigan, to be sure that global customers can take delivery of products without delay, without uncertainty. And we're really proud of that in the state of Michigan. We need to keep that going. And we're glad to be here with Farmers for Free Trade today because we want to be sure that we're not shy telling that story, that exports underpin so much of our rural economic success in the state of Michigan. Just thinking a little bit about the scope of our agricultural production and the importance of exports, especially for the grain industry. Here in Michigan, agriculture, our 2nd largest economic engine. When you look at the full scope of food and agricultural production, around a quarter of jobs in our state are somehow tied back to the food value chain, second only to the manufacturing industry. We can't lose that, especially in places like Breckenridge, where rural businesses like MAC are cornerstones of the local economy, and where businesses like this are able to help farmers across mid-Michigan to be successful. Okay, so how do we think about this going forward? Number one, from the perspective of our organization, we have got to continue to prioritize major existing export destinations for Michigan grown products. That means somehow ensuring that we have export opportunities into one of our absolute largest trading partners, China. It means maintaining the North American partnerships that are so important for us here in Michigan, including our largest trading partner, Canada, and our 2nd largest export destination, Mexico. We have an opportunity as an industry, I think, to make sure we're telling that story, how critical exports are, especially to these large existing markets, and to support policymakers in their efforts to make sure we have fair but open trade and opportunities to market products around the world. I'll close by just mentioning the grain industry alone, which Robert's a part of, and the whole MAC team, which is working really hard with the soybean harvest right now. The grain industry alone in the state of Michigan supports around 15,000 direct jobs, according to a recent economic analysis released by NGFA, and pumps billions of dollars, $4.8 billion annually into our state's economy. That's not nothing. That's very important. It supports farmer livelihoods and rural economic success. And again, we have some concern about the uncertainty that has been created around export markets and export opportunities. We want to continue to see Michigan achieve record export volume and value. We believe that's possible because we have farmers that have achieved that multiple times. We have rural businesses that are integral to their success that have made that happen. And we have a state Department of Agriculture that works hand in glove with our exporters to make sure that we're able to do everything we can with the export markets we have. But some of this is beyond our control. Some of it's beyond the state of Michigan. And that's why we're really we're raising our voice to be sure everyone out there knows the critical importance of export markets for Michigan agriculture. Again, I want to say thank you to the director for your comments and Robert for hosting your comments as well. And maybe Brian, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck. And thank you, Director Boring and Robert. Why don't we have Allie McCone, who's on the ground there with you, talk a little bit about the Motorcade for Trade and the listening tour that we've been doing. I think it's important that we're hearing a Michigan perspective, but part of the Motorcade for Trade's objective has been to listen throughout the Midwest as we're in harvest and really hear from farmers and talk with members of Congress and others in the public. So, Allie, tell us how the tour has been going.
Yes, we have had a great time on our wonderful tour so far. We started in early September, started out in Nebraska, had a couple events out there. We had Dusty Johnson with us at one. We had Brian, who else did we have at our
Adrian Smith was our kickoff in Nebraska.
Yeah, we had him. And then we ended our event at Summer Ori's farm out in Iowa and spent a good week out in Iowa, kind of going around, talking to local farmers, going to those farms, talking to everybody there, kind of hearing, you know, what is going on and what is affecting them the most. From Iowa, we went to Illinois, and then in Illinois, we kind of did the same thing, you know, went through, I think the biggest thing is talking to these local farmers and hearing what really is hurting them and how it's affecting them. And that has been, I think, the biggest perspective of kind of how big this all is, after talking to everybody in all these different states. From Illinois, we went to Indiana, we did World Dairy Expo, definitely been fun and cool to do events like that, like the World Dairy Expo, the Clay County Fair. Those things have been great to kind of just talk to, you know, more local community members. There's obviously a lot more people at those events, so it's great to be able to be out there and, you know, hearing from everybody. And now we are here in Michigan, and we'll continue our tour going on, and then we'll end in DC.
And I think a couple things thank you, Allie. I think a couple things that I would highlight from this tour. Number one, farmers are hurting. And I think it's really important that everyone hear very clearly that America is already in a farm crisis. We've heard from dozens and dozens of farmers whose cost of production is greater than the price of soybeans or corn or wheat. And that's a recipe for disaster. And I think as we talk about trade and the importance of trade, we can talk about statistics, we can talk about prices, but I think it's important that we always talk about families and talk about farms and generational efforts. You know, farmers, like most every other family in the world, wants the same thing. They want a good life for their kids. They want to be able to pass on the life to their kids that they had or better. And unfortunately, when we have a farm crisis, a lot of that's not going to happen. We are facing increasing bankruptcies and the very real prospect of having families that have been running farms for generations go out of business. And that's why we have a sense of urgency. That's why we're holding events like this one with Director Boring to try to raise the profile and elevate the understanding about why trade is important. And the need to maintain and expand export markets in order to help the American farmer and keep those families on the land. So with that, I would remind folks that we do have the option to take questions. You can put a question into the Q&A or the chat function. I see that we have one question in the Q&A, and please, again, identify yourself when you ask. So with that, I would remind folks that we do have the option to take questions. You can put a question into the Q&A or the chat function. I see that we have one question in the Q&A, and please, again, identify yourself when you ask a question. So this first question is from Oliver Ward. Oliver writes, we often hear in some parts of rural America that the short-term pain from Trump's trade policy will be worth the long-term gains that appear once the market access concessions negotiated with the UK, Indonesia, and others are fully implemented, and if/when a potential future deal with China materializes. Can you explain what the short-term pain for long-term gain view gets wrong? Why don't we allow folks in the room to take that question? I'm happy to chime in as well, but let's start with folks in the room.
Sure, this is Chuck Lippstreu of the Agribusiness Association, and I think it's a good question. I think it's important to keep in mind that Michigan farmers across the nation, those in agriculture, support President Trump, continue to support President Trump overall, and at the same time are anxious about where trade stands. And for us in Michigan, we're especially focused on where the bulk of our exports go today first. Before we get to additional agreements, I think there's a need to make sure we have certainty with regard to our major export destinations, Canada, Mexico, and China, chief among them. For our organization, especially for us here in Michigan, where we are a hub for North American trade and travel and commerce, that relationship with Canada in particular stands out. The relationship with Mexico from an export perspective stands out. And certainly our soybean growers and anybody on the soybean value chain is concerned about the situation with China. Making sure that we maintain and expand those major existing export destinations would go a long way to providing some ability for all of us to sleep better at night. That said, the administration is also, as we know, as you mentioned in your question, taking new steps to prioritize new market development, and we applaud that. We think that's a good thing. But for us in Michigan, making sure we have certainty with regard to those major export destinations by volume and value is so important as a step one.
Director Boring, would you like to answer as well? You don't have to, but you're welcome to if you'd like to jump in.
Well, I would say too that I think in a state like Michigan that has long prioritized exports, and we've got a thriving agribusiness industry here that facilitates those exports. Farmers understand the need for long-term market building. The markets that we've had, for instance, for our dry beans going around the world, into Mexico, for navy beans going into Europe, for our soybeans, a lot of our RP soybeans going to the Far East market. Those are the result of long-standing market development efforts that are predicated on trust, reliability, quality, and relationships. So farmers, I think, here in Michigan are fully understand that the fact that these things take time. And these are long-term investments of how we build things. But at the same time, the importance of those relationships, I think is really highlighted now. Certainly those export destinations, those individual business relationships that Robert has with customers around the world, that trust and that relationship building still remains on a business-to-business aspect here. But I think the concern still remains here of how the United States more broadly establishes itself as a reliable trading partner. I think Chuck's done a really great job of talking about the importance of those existing markets. And yes, new markets, that continues to be important. As the American producer enjoys, ever increasing gains in productivity and total production here, that we need markets for these crops. But a lot of work has gone into creating these established markets. And so we certainly want to hang on to those. And we're seeing on a global aspect here of the erosion of some of that market potential. And firsthand here, we're seeing how China is now, predominantly sourcing their soybean needs from other places in the world based on trade relationships they've cultivated over for some time here. And I think it does pose a longer term threat here to what the end point is on production. We're certainly having some approaches here of prioritizing domestic production, domestic consumption of any number of products, domestic manufacturing. But again, the Michigan agricultural economy is significantly based on exports as well. We grow a lot of things, we process a lot of foods here that are consumed domestically, that are exported. But those markets don't function to their full potential here if we don't also have exports as a piece to that.
So thank you for that, Director Boring. And I'll just add a couple of additional thoughts before we go to the next question. I think number one, I think Director Boring hit on a really important point, which is, we don't operate in a vacuum. It's not just the US trying to sell to other countries. We have competitors. And when we lose market share and create a vacuum that allows, for example, Brazil to step in, there's no going back from that, right? You think about the trade war in 2018 when we had a trade war with China. That allowed Brazil to increase market share. It incentivized China to invest in Brazilian infrastructure. It incentivized Brazil to put more acreage under the plow. And what does that mean? That means long-term, Brazil is now a much more well-positioned competitor to the US than they had been before that trade war. And the same thing is happening again. We're seeing Brazil become emboldened, more land being put under the plow, and we're seeing Argentina now exporting soybeans to China. So this notion that if we just deal with short-term pain, we'll have long-term gain, I think is fundamentally flawed. If we don't do this right, we can lose markets forever and we can find ourselves in a much weakened competitive position, and there's not a long-term gain. So it's a big leap of trust that losing a market as big as China, 12.5 billion or 14 billion in soybean exports, that losing that market can be replaced. You can't make up that level of soybean exports by selling, for example, to Indonesia. It's just not a big enough market. So I think that's number one. Number two, keep in mind also, we are penalizing ourselves with tariffs on imports. So we talk about tractor parts. We don't need to be putting tariffs on inbound tractor parts. That's hurting our farmer, that's squeezing our farmer. We could have exemptions to those tariffs so that we could be pushing for expanded market access elsewhere without hurting the farmer in terms of raising input costs. So I think there are other ways that we can prosecute these kind of trade wars. Also, the question of should we be going after every country in the world at once, or should we be prioritizing and saying if China's our priority, let's get our allies together and really squeeze China. Maybe not launch multiple trade wars at the same time, because I think that's part of what's causing the disruption and the uncertainty. Let's go to the next question. This is from Nicole with Brownfield Ag News right there in Michigan. Hi, Nicole. Great to have you with us. Nicole writes, USDA has stopped trade missions and other work as part of the shutdown. How is this deadlock in Congress impacting trade progress? Also, export efforts from the state's international ag marketing efforts. Chuck, Robert, Director Boring, would you like to take that question?
Well, certainly we're tracking some of those federal shutdown efforts across a variety of different avenues here. The continuation of those trade missions is always really important, but at the same time, some of the reports that aren't coming out with the government shutdown are going to have some impacts on the markets and international trade as well here. So, you know, the continued work on again, right, building new markets is important here. It's critical to keep expanding those pathways as part of that longer term, you know, approach of new market development. We're concerned about some of those federal, hopefully temporary impacts here of what federal workers are able to go out and do. But again, broadly, I think it's the predictability of those, the predictability of the United States to be a reliable trading partner with so many of these markets across the world here. So, you know, the government shutdown here, I think is another piece to this of making sure that we've got reliable, well-functioning markets, that the United States is well poised to continue to engage on these discussions. So we're certainly tracking those impacts, but a lot of this does become even broader than that in the long term.
I would just add very briefly, when I think over the last 10 to 15 years, because we have been through a handful of federal government shutdowns, it feels like this happens maybe more often than it does. I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind that this federal shutdowns are not that common, and we're hopeful that this can get addressed as soon as possible, and the federal government can continue its work. Nicole, I would also note that, as you know, here in Michigan last week, lawmakers came together on a strong bipartisan basis, worked through some difficult issues, and ultimately passed a bipartisan budget agreement that funds the roads, that funds departments of government in common ways, and in fact funds at full levels, full year-over-year levels, the important functions at MDARD that we rely on to facilitate exports. And that was done not because it was easy, but because Speaker Hall and Leader Briggs and the governor and her team were able to come together and work through some difficult issues and get a budget agreement in place. We were glad to see that. It's good for Michigan agriculture. It's good for exports because, again, we rely on our state government as well as the federal government on these topics. And certainly coming off of that very busy week last week, we're hopeful that the federal government will be able to, as soon as possible. A shutdown is not good for anybody involved here on the ground in places like Breckenridge.
Thank you all. Next question is from Chris Clayton, specifically to Director Boring. Chris asks, what have you heard from farmers and agricultural lenders about farmer finances, cash flows, and risk to producers in the state going into 2026? Great question, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that's an important part to talk about here as well. And certainly those are conversations that we're having. You know, a lot of farms, I think, are starting from a pretty healthy financial position. And there's a lot of parallels being drawn right now to the 1980s farm crisis. You know, as inflation continues to tick up, there are parallels there, but I think there's some important differences to the condition of the farm economy today than what it was at that point. And the relative strength of farmer balance sheets, I think, is one important differentiation to that. Now, of course, there's a wide spectrum here. There's some farms that probably aren't in as strong of an initial starting point here, that are not as well poised with capital assets to weather a long duration of an economic downturn like this. But in general, that our lending partners tell us that farmers are generally in good positions. Michigan does tend to be a diversified state. And so that we do have a lot of operations that have multiple crops under their crop rotations. The livestock sector, in contrast to some of the grains, is comparatively strong right now. And so that diversified nature of Michigan production insulates us and provides some risk mitigation to some level. But at the same time, I think you're right to talk about some of those concerns and from a financial point of increased credit or continued credit access, and how farmer balance sheets are probably going to be in a challenging position in the short term here to pencil significant profits moving forward.
Thank you, Director Boring. Nicole has asked a number of questions, so I'm going to field another couple of those. She asks, how have the trade negotiations back and forth with Mexico impacted demand for dry beans and other crops?
To maybe take off on just the broader political situation. I think one of the things that we know, and we keep very close eye on the situation, the trade situation with Mexico, because of the critical nature of the export market into Mexico, especially for Michigan grown dry beans. As a couple of other speakers mentioned, Michigan is well known globally as a high quality producer of a number of different classes of dry beans. And in addition, we have logistics down in a way that our global competitors may not entirely. We're able to leverage those long-term lasting relationships and also the logistical expertise that you can only build over the course of time in a state like Michigan to make sure that buyers can take delivery of beans in a predictable way, that they're going to be high quality when they get there. We've been heartened to see what appears to be a productive relationship between President Sheinbaum and President Trump, with the two administrations, working through some trade challenges and other challenges. We're certainly hopeful that we can maintain that export market into Mexico long term. And again, as the director mentioned, there are competitive factors, including in the bean market. It comes back to the need to make sure we're prioritizing and focused on those very large existing markets alongside new market development. For us in Michigan to see a diminished export capacity into Canada, Mexico, China, some of these leading export destinations, all of those would be really problematic and unsettling. And so I would say, though, again, as we sort of watch from our seat in Lansing, how things are going in terms of the U.S.-Mexico political relationship, we are heartened to see what appears to be good dialogue between the U.S. and Mexico, and hopefully we can maintain that relationship to maintain exports into Mexico.
I would say too, just to put a fine point on some of what Chuck just shared there, which is all exactly accurate, right? The Michigan dry bean industry going into places like Mexico has enjoyed for some time some significant advantages here. We have premium quality, we have strong recognized brands, we've got well-developed infrastructure to make sure that our products are reaching markets. But buyers in Mexico are certainly prioritizing all of those aspects. But the predictability of what market access is going to be, what price can continue to be into the future, those are aspects that are important that buyers consider as well. Is the price that they might contract and agree to buy beans today going to be that same price that's in 3 months or 6 months or a year out? So we're seeing here, and we're hearing anecdotal reports of, despite all the significant initial advantages that Michigan beans have, if we can't provide that market certainty, that some of those other beans might have greater potential there to hit those markets. They might be of some slightly diminished quality. They might not have the brand recognition. The logistics might not be there in the same kind of way, but they're more predictable markets. And so that continues to be this concern here of how the United States seems a reliable trading partner to some of our long-standing trade relationships.
Thank you for those answers. We're going to do, I think, one more question and then maybe we'll wrap. Nicole writes, she asked specifically if I can speak to the USDA and DOJ's MOU to investigate high inputs and the effect it could offer farmers. Will relief/results be soon enough? I'd welcome anyone to jump in on this question, but I'll give my 2 cents. So as folks probably know, U.S. Department of Agriculture and Department of Justice announced a joint effort to investigate high input costs on farmers and to look for antitrust and anti-competitive activities that they pledged to investigate if they found them. I think overall, good. It's a good thing to be looking at. If we can find antitrust violations, we absolutely should go after those. Anything we can do to hold down input costs for farmers is appreciated. Having said that, I would note a couple of things. Number one, the rise in input costs has been continuing for years now. And I think part of that pegs back to the original trade wars from 2018, when we drove up input costs. And as we know, when prices go up, rarely do they come back down. Once a company is charging a higher cost, they have very little incentive to lower that price, especially if their competitors are not lowering their prices. So I think part of what we've seen is inflation driven by the original trade wars and by just overall inflation in the economy. I mean, it is not just farmers who are facing higher costs. We're seeing it in grocery prices. We're seeing it in all manner of consumer goods. So I think we need to keep this in context. The other thing I would note, as I mentioned earlier, is just the need to be very, I think, more strategic in terms of how we apply tariffs to inbound goods. Remember, a tariff is a tax, and it's a tax paid by the importer that's very directly passed on to the consumer. So I was talking with a farmer in Ohio just yesterday who was walking around his combine, and he noticed that he had a pulley on the combine that said "Made in China." And then he noticed he had another pulley or another part of the machinery that had a part made in Spain. And you realize with integrated supply chains these days, that John Deere tractor, that John Deere combine had parts from countries all over the world. So if we're not careful and we put tariffs on other countries and what they're importing into the U.S., that can raise costs very directly for farmers, and we don't need an investigation to know that. We can just see that cost is going up because of the tariff. So I think that would be the other side. We should definitely be looking to reduce tariffs on farm inputs, and I would call out specifically farm chemicals. Fertilizer should never have a tariff placed on it. Farm equipment parts. And again, even things like steel and aluminum can have a very direct impact on farmers with grain bins or cattle guards or fencing. All of those are steel and aluminum intensive products. Would anyone in the room like to comment on input costs and specifically USDA and DOJ MOU?
Well, I'll just say too, that a predominant theme that I hear from farmers when I talk to them is concerns about consolidation and competition. And so farmers are acutely aware of the need for why competition in a marketplace is healthy, it's necessary, it's critical to them having access to diversified markets. Here in Michigan, we do have a strong competitive marketplace. We have a number of grain companies, for instance. We're sitting here at a Michigan-based company that is a part of really promoting ongoing success of Michigan agriculture today. So these broad efforts on both the state and federal level of making sure that we have a business marketplace that prioritizes competition, that sets forth a business climate in which those kinds of things are recognized as values, I think is overall a good thing. So we'll continue to work on talking about why the importance for that economically competitive marketplace, why that is so important for farmers and the long-term success of our rural communities.
Great. Thank you. And actually, we will do one more question. We've got a good one here that the panelists feel free to answer this if you would like. The question is, Trump has promised to get soybeans into upcoming China talks, and it directly impacted futures markets. How have social posts directly impacted your business? What if Trump doesn't deliver? Question mark.
Happy to maybe kick it off there. Chuck at the Agribusiness Association. I think that if we go back just to maybe zoom back to the beginning of the second term here and all the different trade negotiation points that we've been through, whether it's social posts or statements or executive orders, or really anything coming from the administration on this topic, as they take what's very clearly a new tack on trade negotiations. I would say that our industry has, through the course of February, March, April, into the summer, and now today, we've been through different sort of negotiation points and focus areas on different trading partners. We've been through, as we said, different communication methods from the administration. I think agriculture here in Michigan understands that it is a new day in terms of how the U.S. negotiates trade agreements, and it deals with trade overall. And I think farmers and our industry members appreciate that and understand it. So I would say that there's an understanding that this is new. It's not like it has been done in the past. And I think farmers and agribusinesses are navigating that as best they can, just like they navigate other new elements of their business. So, I think it's likely we're going to continue to see the administration engage on trade topics and export topics in ways that we have not seen before. I think that's it should be fairly apparent to everyone on the call, and I think is apparent to our industry, right? So I think we'll continue to see some of those new communication styles and new trade negotiation efforts, and that's something that farmers and our members will, continue to navigate.
Great answer. Thank you for that, Chuck.
Okay, I think you meant the last question, right? If so, can I just say one last thing?
Sure.
I don't mean to steal the mic.
No, you go right ahead. You have it.
No, thank you, sir. Look, I just think as we close out, I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us. And we've talked about a few topics here, but I just want to be sure everyone remembers Michigan has increased its exports by value over the years. We're in record export level. Thanks to the work of farmers and rural businesses and our State Department of Agriculture that partners with them to make sure we are doing everything we can to grow the rural economy and to support export markets from our state. Michigan is an export success story. We want to keep that going. We want to make sure it continues with some of our largest trading partners across North America and Asia in particular. And I think that's really why we're all here today with Farmers for Free Trade, to underscore that important message. And we'll continue to talk about the value of exports and trade for Michigan agriculture going forward.
I'll just add to that too, that I'm really glad that the Motorcade for Trade here is in Michigan, where we can talk about the wide breadth of issues that we have going on in the state. Certainly, the Chinese impacts on the soybean market are a cloud over the entire agricultural economy right now. But the ability for us to talk about and highlight some of these more specific issues in diverse states like Michigan, I think is really critical to getting into the nuance of what's the secondary headlines in some of this. The concerns and that market potential of our dry bean industry, getting into places like Mexico and having continued access to that. That's really critical for us having a diversified and strong, resilient agricultural economy here in Michigan. And I know other places across the country, the MDARD region, are going to be in a similar position there. The strength of our Michigan cropping systems is based in a lot of ways on exports. And so those concerns and then those economic and market uncertainties for any number of crops here in the state, whether it's apples, whether it's cherries, asparagus, a variety of our vegetables, those are concerns about how we have continued success of those cropping systems in such a perilous time of not knowing what our international export markets are going to be and the impact of some of these retaliatory tariffs. Michigan apples, for instance, a lot of Michigan apples are domestically consumed, but that is set up on the fact that a lot of our apples grown in the Pacific Northwest are exported across the Pacific. And so when the Pacific Northwest loses market access, that really has ramifications to Michigan producers in a number of indirect ways. So being able to continue talking about and spelling out just how complex and dynamic these issues continue to be, it does. Our agricultural systems are the result of decades of work of building international markets, and those markets, that market access, can easily be destroyed very quickly. And we've seen how other countries are more than willing to come in, adapt to their local production infrastructure and capacity to meet that international market, and ultimately ice the United States out of some of these relationships that we've built over time here. So we're going to continue to really talk about the importance of this and advocate on behalf of growers the need for this market certainty and the continued market development here that's so critical to our cropping systems.
Yeah, if I could just wrap up, I think Director Boring, term of certainty is really what our farmers are looking for. You know, our customers are making plans 6 to 8 months ahead of time. They're thinking about next spring already. They're planting a crop once a year, they're raising a crop once a year, and they're harvesting a crop once a year. And the best way to be able to do that is to have certainty that there's demand for their product, certainty that they're gonna have financing for their crops, and certainty that they'll be able to provide for their families. Because really, farmers across America are the foundation of values and responsibility. And I think we need to be able to make sure that we are providing that certainty so they can continue to do what they do, so that we can continue to eat and grow the values of the products here at Michigan, as well as those across the United States. So I think certainty in trade is really is the foundation of continue to bring value to farms across the state of Michigan.
Wonderful. I would like to conclude by thanking our panelists, Director Boring, Chuck and Michigan Agribusiness Association, Robert and Michigan Agricultural Commodities, Allie and the team that are with the Motorcade for Trade and logging long hours and long miles to come to states throughout the Midwest. Thank you all for coming together today, and thank you for the media that dialed in. We had a good group on, and hopefully we will have some good reporting coming out of this event. So thank you all for your time today. And with that, we will conclude this Farmers for Free Trade Motorcade for Trade event. Thank you.